An essential level of myofunctional therapy is understanding that it isn't just muscular, it is neurological. And it starts with the cranial nerve function. Most therapists overlook this, and it could be severely impacting or sabotaging your treatment outcomes. Today, we're going to get to the bottom of it and just make sure that you fully understand the connection between myofunctional therapy and cranial nerves, because it's not something that's talked about nearly enough for the level of impact that it absolutely has on all of your clients. And so, welcome to yet another session of, Carice rambling and teaching you things that'll help you become excellent. I'm Carice Laguerre. I am a myo best friend for all of the myofunctional therapists and aspiring myofunctional therapists out there who deserve much better than anything I had when I was trying to learn this field. And I offer over 70 hours currently. We're really close to 80, but over 70 hours currently here on YouTube or on LinkedIn, wherever you're watching. Please drop a hi, hello. All of the engagement actually helps. It helps to keep this going. I don't want to be talking out into the void. And if you guys want to go back to, the olden days of gatekeeping and whatever, then feel free to not comment, not share, not interact, not follow. But I don't believe in gatekeeping. I think 2025 gatekeeping had to die. You shouldn't sit on a webinar, watch a webinar, learn absolutely nothing, and then have to pay for additional info. At this day and age, if you want to learn something, you want to know something, reach out to me. I'm happy to do a webinar on it or point you to where I've already talked about it or update such webinars, because I've been going live nearly every week since 2023, providing you with all sorts of info and, all of the information to become as excellent as possible in myofunctional therapy. So subscribe, follow if you are watching on LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect with all of you and keep this going and keep it up. But enough of that nonsense, all of the introductory welcome, formalities. We're going to move on and get into the content, because I'm sure some of you are wondering, what are cranial nerves? And let me tell you, I have a detailed 1 hour long one where I go through each of the cranial nerves, all 12 of them, and I really do a deep dive into all of them and how you stimulate them and how you can work with them. It's a great video. And at the end of this on YouTube, you will find a direct link where you could just click to watch that after this. But today, I'm going to make it simple, sweet, easy to understand and digest the cranial nerves, what is the direct impact with myofunctional therapy, and how you can stimulate them, but not directly, because there's already a video on that. So if you're wondering what are cranial nerves and why this video is so short in comparison to the hour-long one that exists already on this channel and will be linked at the end, that's why, because there's more and you can deep dive even further into additional information, but we'll talk about that later. So the cranial nerves are essentially, it's like art almost. Our bodies, the human body is a wonderful place, and it's full of such grand artistry that you can't even understand and comprehend. We have nerves running all through our body, and most of them are really centrally located in our spinal cord. However, we've got 12 very special nerves that have direct signaling, that have direct access straight to the brain, and really do drive a lot of the functions that we look at directly and deal with and try to make change for in myofunctional therapy. So when we deal with our fine motor function skills that are in our beautiful work area in the orofacial and some of the oropharyngeal space, we are into a lot of the cranial nerves. Now, there's a super six, but I think we can really bring it down to a Fab Five. And so I will introduce you to our Fab Five. But just in case that wasn't a good enough explanation, because I'm telling you, it took me forever to really hone down what are the cranial nerves and how are they so impactful. I figured it was better if I was able to give you a visualization. So you can understand anatomy wise that these nerve endings are coming directly from the brain, directly from our brainstem. We are going to see these nerves anatomically. But I want you to stop thinking about cranial nerves like this and start thinking of it like a different structure, like a building, okay? More specifically, we're going to think about it as a hotel. Now, when we think of hotels, I want you to think of a five-star hotel with exceptional service. They have 10 different floors, or maybe there's 100 floors. Let's say there's 100 floors. So they have a hundred different floors, and there are very, very special and important people who stay in the penthouse suites or just the suites, and those are always on the upper floors. Okay, so associate that with the brain and the body. So imagine the human body, but now it's a hotel, and all of the very important people, the great suites, the penthouse suites, the honeymoon suites are up top, and everything else is down bottom. It doesn't make anybody else less important. You just know that your VIPs are upstairs. That's where you keep all of your, clients that are important. Whatever. I'm overemphasizing that aspect of it. However, we have a central pathway through the hotel. Everybody has to get into the elevators. And so the elevator takes you through from the lobby all the way up to the penthouse, right? And so consider that your spinal cord. That is your entire nerve ending central location. That's where everything is. And so all of your nervous system regulation really happens, and your responses and so forth are driven from your spinal cord up to the brain. But we can't rely on that for our VIPs. If you're paying for a penthouse, you don't want the same treatment as somebody who's paying for like an economy suite, economy room, I should say, not suite, but an economy room. You expect better treatment because you're paying thousands of dollars a night as compared to hundreds of dollars a night. And so we have to set up a different system within the hotel that really services like concierge to those important floors. And so you can imagine the 12 cranial nerves being the top 12 floors. Now, for myofunctional therapy's purpose, I want you to imagine that everything we're working with, there are 6 nerves that really do help to work with a lot of what we are in the head and neck and swallowing and tongue motor function and so forth. And we're going to get into that in just a second. But we're going to limit it to the top 5 floors. And we're going to say that our 5 floors of cranial nerve function, that's how everything happens. And you have a team of people that are able to go through secret back doors and secret entrances to connect directly to the penthouse suites and to do everything that we need to get done within the hotel. So it's a separate housekeeping, it's a separate technician and services, it's separate, food service management, it's separate, and it is special and unique, and it's a direct pathway to the penthouse. So we don't have to, wait for the elevator to go through floors 1 through 80. We could just skip to like the top important floors. Okay. So hopefully that wasn't more confusing, and hopefully this image isn't too creepy, but I think it's a really great way to, drive home. This is what we're working with. We're working with a special set of nerves that give special signals for special functional tasks. And it's like the top floor of a hotel. Let me know if you didn't get that. Drop it in the comments, but hopefully you got it and it's great. Okay. Our Fab Five, our team of 5 for the continuation to keep the continuity of the hotel. I want you to think about them in these specific roles. Okay. So our Fab Five, we're going to go from lowest to highest because our cranial nerves fire in sequence. We have cranial nerve 1 through 12, and they fire in sequence. You're going to have cranial nerve 5 as like your director of maintenance. Maintenance being a lot of our bone structures, and if you're not totally familiar with it or you needed this reminder today, a lot of our bone responds to loading, a lot of pressure and loading. So when there are things that are going to be going through a lot of function and doing a lot of functional work and creating a lot of force, you're going to need a director of maintenance. That's going to be your trigeminal nerve, cranial nerve 5. Okay. Cranial nerve 5 is going to be for all of your muscles of mastication. So when we're working on the jaws, when we're working on overstimulated or understimulated, or when we're working on overdeveloped or underdeveloped nerves or muscles in the muscles that support the jaw and our chewing functions, that's cranial nerve 5. I want you to think director of maintenance. Ooh, we got to call him. Okay. Director of Public Relations, cranial nerve 7, is about facial expression. So she is going to be the fab nerve that is going to really work all of or innervate all of the muscles that are facial expression. So when we have somebody who has difficulty smiling or has difficulty frowning or has difficulty with the lips and the lips closure and seal, that is cranial nerve 7. Okay. And I know you're thinking about it right now from the perspective of like, oh, these are things that we look at. Great. You also have to know how to touch or work these nerves. Okay. So while I'm creating a simple analogy, don't think that it's like incredibly simple. I just want this for memory and for muscle memory for your brain so you can rapidly recall it. Director of maintenance, cranial nerve 5. Director of public relations, cranial nerve 7. Like that is facial expression. That's what people see first, public relations, right? Our quality control officer is going to be cranial nerve 9. That's our glossopharyngeal. That's our swallowing. Like, just think of that as your oral phase swallow. You have your tongue thrusters, whether it's a frontal or a lateral thrust. Like, you have those people who are swallowing inappropriately with facial muscle recruitment. Facial muscle recruitment is going to be a compensatory action of cranial nerve 7. So now we've got 7 and 9 in dysfunction. But I want you to think about the swallow, the lip purse, the head nod, the engagement of the mentalis for the swallow, the engagement of the overactivation of the cheeks or pouching in the cheeks, or anything that's accompanying that swallow. Your quality control of that swallow is off. Cranial nerve 9. Cranial nerve 10, that's the biggest one. Like, I mean, cranial nerve 10, our vagus nerve is responsible for so much. It's almost like our CEO if the CEO didn't have to be the brain. Okay, the brain is definitely your CEO. But right under there, chief operations, yeah, that's cranial nerve 10. Okay, so your hotel operations, cranial nerve 10. She's responsible for keeping that airway open, the soft palate lifted. If there's any deviation or error in how the uvula is sitting in the midline, like you know that that's the vagus nerve. Autonomic nervous system dysregulation, that's the vagus nerve. That is the big guns. That's your COO. Logistics. Logistics is going to be cranial nerve 12, your hypoglossal. Hypoglossal is essentially like the engine that's moving all of the motor function for the tongue. It's really in charge of the logistics of the tongue. So when you think about logistics and you think about maybe dispatching and so forth, I want you to think about the logistics of how our tongue, which operates as a muscular hydrostat, so it's a lot of muscular collaboration and coordination to manipulate and to alter the shape and function of the tongue, that is going to be our cranial nerve 12. Okay, so these are our 5 fab. These are the people who would be making a lot of money within the hotel because they're keeping things really, really up and running and moving at a great pace. Okay, so if you're wondering, hey, Chris, I thought you said there was like a super six. There is a super six. I would say that definitely the accessory nerve, cranial nerve 11. Now, when you're dealing with cranial nerve 11, that's some of your sternocleidomastoid dysfunction. That's how the head turns and the inability for it to do so or not do so. A lot of your people with a lot of tension and strain who can't elevate their chin and so forth. Like we're dealing with that accessory nerve there. I just want you to focus on the Fab Five, though. Focus on the Fab Five. Cranial nerve 11 is super important. I also think other cranial nerves are important. They're all important because they fire in sequence. And so if one is off, that's going to impact a lot of others. Focus on these Fab Five for understanding how this impacts myofunctional therapy. Okay. All right. So, what does that make you? Where in there does that really help you understand how you are a part of this? Well, you're like the executive manager of the hotel. You are making sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. Everybody reports back to you. And how exactly do they report back to you? Well, during your evaluation, you should be looking for cranial nerve dysfunction. You should be looking to see if there is asymmetry in the function, if there is any issues with the ability to actually functionally stimulate or to achieve some of the reflexes that actually happen during some of these cranial nerve tasks and functions. When you are looking at that, and then you're able to say, okay, you're able to better manage what's going on and where do you have to send people. Like, oh, I need to contact the director of public relations because there's issues going on with cranial nerve 7. Oh, I need to tap into our logistics because there's issues with cranial nerve 12. You need to be able to automatically in the back of your mind know and get to that point. That way you can get into where you need to get into, because when there is dysfunction with the nerve endings, that's slowing you down and it's preventing sometimes your patients from progressing. So when you find that you stalemate or you plateau or they get to points of frustration where they cannot activate or achieve a certain thing, it is likely because there is cranial nerve dysfunction and there is an error with trying to get there. Just like with primitive reflexes and some of the primitive reflexes that might be that might be retained, and when they're retained for too long, that alters the ability to do certain tasks, right? It alters the ability for writing or balance or whatever. It alters the ability to do tasks. So does cranial nerve dysregulation. So you have to be able to understand which cranial nerve it is and how to stimulate or initiate better function or stimulate function. That way you can get it to really work again. Because a lot of the cranial nerves, it's never just one. It's never just one. It's always multiples. And more commonly than not, you'll find your Fab Five are involved in almost every case that you have. And in a lot of cases, cranial nerve 8, cranial nerve 11, they come along too for the ride. And there's dysfunction just all along multiple points of the chain. But for myo directly, let's take a look. And I know some of you are looking at this picture already. And if you're myofunctional therapists that are very seasoned, heck, even if you're not seasoned, hopefully you've seen a lot in this image right now already. You're like, wow, there's a lot going on. They look very narrow. I don't like the way that tongue looks. Is that scalloping there? The mouth is open. The tongue is low. Like there's a lot going on. I get it. Here's where I want you to focus. Okay. If we're talking about low tongue posture, let's just relate it to our cranial nerves. Low tongue posture could be a trigeminal issue because it could be a lack of sensory stimulation. So they might not have good access to trigeminal, and therefore they just don't have the sensory perception to get the tongue elevated to the palate. They just don't have the stimulation there. Maybe something has prevented or understimulated our spot And therefore, that trigeminal has not been engaged because the tongue hasn't been there, a thumb hasn't been there, like nothing's been stimulating that area. So now they struggle with elevation. It could be a facial muscle issue with an inability to activate the orbicularis oris. And we know if the mouth is open, the tongue's not going to be. Why would your tongue be lightly suctioned to the roof of your mouth if your mouth is open? Nobody walks around like that, right? So low tongue posture might actually be a symptom of the facial nerve, and it might be a issue that you have to resolve there before you start working on a lot of the tongue and the tongue posture things. Or it could be a hypoglossal issue. And it could just be a motor dysfunction where they've never elevated the tongue. You'd be so surprised at what you think is a simple task. And I tell people this almost on a daily basis because, yes, I work full time as a myofunctional therapist. Um, I tell people on a daily basis that it looks simple. It might look like it's super easy. It's something that I do and I don't even have to think about it at this point, but I'm doing this all the time. If you don't have the muscle memory or you haven't put in the repetitions for this, like elevating your tongue isn't easy for everybody. Sticking out your tongue, protruding your tongue is not an easy task for everybody. Lateralizing is not an easy task. And an inability to do so is not just that you have a restrictive piece of connective tissue underneath your tongue, referred to as a frenum. It is not just tongue tie. You could have cranial nerve dysfunction where you need to stimulate that in order to generate a response so that you can do a motor task. And so when we're thinking about our fine motor function, there's a lot to think about other than, look, I asked you to elevate your tongue. I'm tapping on this area here, elevate your tongue to it. Okay, I'm lifting up your tongue, elevate your tongue and hold it there. It's so much more than that because it might be a cranial nerve deficiency that's really not allowing everything to click in the way that it should. So the OMT connection is that sometimes your progress or lack thereof is directly rooted to a cranial nerve dysfunction. And if you haven't troubleshooted that to start, there was no troubleshooting that began, you're going to struggle to get over that hump and it'll take you longer, building frustration. It builds out a lot of frustration. I've never met anybody who's been doing years of therapy, and I'm not talking about myofunctional, although I'm sure there are people who do that, but who I've never met anybody who's been doing years of therapy and were like super excited about it. Like, oh yeah, it's going great. We're making no progress. So it builds up points of frustration and it builds down your wall of confidence as a therapist because you feel like you don't know what's going wrong. Why can't I troubleshoot this? And then you find yourself in a Facebook group and you're asking all these questions. And I'm always looking at some of those questions and I'm like, did they do anything with the cranial nerves? None of my business. Like, none of my business at all. But it is something to think about. It is something to consciously work on getting better at. And if your next stop isn't watching the cranial nerve video and to understand and dive deeper, then I don't know, you must not want this because it is an incredible aspect of my pillars of progress that I teach in the myomodalities course that has to happen. There's a lot I do in myofunctional therapy and a lot that I consider in my programs, but absolutely nothing happens until I've worked on the cranial nerves. Like the cranial nerves and any sort of body mapping and all that stuff has to happen prior to me getting into myofunctional therapy tasks. And if we haven't started to work on and align those cranial nerves and stimulate them, like what are we doing with myo? We're just giving them exercises that they could really just go anywhere and do that. There's no progress really being made there. And so I think that's where the transformation really happens is when you are adequately prepped. Okay. Pillars of progress I teach in the myomodalities course, and part of that is how you stimulate or work the nerves. I thought that was really cute because, people be working your nerves, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. There's two ways that you can work the cranial nerves. Manually, you can and maybe not as a myofunctional therapist, and why it's really important to work with a cranial sacral therapist, an osteopath, a physical therapist, or somebody who knows how to manually manipulate, how to touch the nerves, how to apply certain pressures, or how to cause movement of the interstitial fluids that are going to impact the cranial nerves, that will get those things fired up, that will get them working for you and on a better path. Or non-manually, which is some of the stuff that I teach, where you're actually indirectly influencing a stimulation of the nerves. You're working the nerves without actually touching them by engaging them in tasks, in activities, in exercises that are going to help to create that integration of the cranial nerves and allow them to fire in a way that is optimal and going to allow your patient to progress through your programs. I like non-manual because it's repeatable. Like, they can do it at home and they can work on their cranial nerves twice a day, three times a day, every single day until the next time they see me and we start working on something else. Manual is great if you're able to see a manual therapist multiple times a week. Awesome. That's fabulous. Do so. But that's probably going to be the only downside I find to manual stimulation. I recommend absolutely everybody to do manual stimulation on some plane. They need to work with a manual therapist, even if it's not directly for the cranial nerves. They have to work with a manual therapist because all of that goes together. We're working on function, but a lot of the structure needs to be addressed in some way, shape, or form. So I think they go well together, but the non-manual stimulation, you'll find that in the other lecture, the cranial nerves. MyoLaunch, I mentioned a couple of times. Myolaunch.com. It's a collection of courses for advanced myofunctional therapy information. Myomodalities is on there, and it's a great way for you to learn and continue forth to get my pillars of progress and to really understand how you can work with the cranial nerves. So, to put it all together, okay, I want you to remember your Grand Hotel and all of your staff, your team that you have in your Fab Five, because all of those are direct signals to the brain that are going to impact our work area. And when they're not integrated, these cranial nerves will create poorer sensory and motor perception that is going to impact negatively your treatment plans. Okay. I know this was a quickie, and I'm super happy to do a quick one because I don't always want to be on here for an hour talking about things, and some of you guys have to be getting tired of my voice. But if there are any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll check the chat right now before I log off, but put them in the chat. I am so excited to be here with you every single week. I am always eager to talk to you about all sorts of things. So if there's other things in myofunctional therapy that you want to know and learn, let me know. All right, friends, it was so good to see you. I look forward to seeing you again next time. Bye.